Yeah, so we have kind of broken the agenda framework for estimating the capital against event risk, and so we'll be covering framework. What do we mean by estimating? What's capital, event, and risk? And hoping that we all know about for, the, and against. So let's rearrange it, and we'll go in this order. So it's fairly simple. Uh, so uh, so I would like to make one confession that uh, neither me nor the team that who has kind of worked on this, we are not the experts in kind of building the such frameworks, and especially for the event risks. And event risk is something that I'm sure that all of us have some kind of understanding of what these events are and what the event risks, and how to kind of deal with them, how to quantify them. But we are not the experts, and so there's no point in kind of making it really complicated with putting some complex methods or models. What we are kind of trying here is that to have a discussion, to say that this is what we think, this is the approach that I'm going to propose here, and we can have a discussion and say that whether this is right or not, wrong, how we can improve this, and maybe our understanding could be different from it may be lacking in a few aspects, and I'm sure that we can get some useful feedback to improve that. Okay, so first the events. So what do we mean by an event? When we say event risk, what's an event? So I would want some suggestions from you. I will not move forward to next slide unless I get at least 5 suggestions. So, yeah. Yeah. Right. So cyclone and foot and mouth disease. AP crisis. Yes, but you're right. So it's an important characteristic of these events. You're right, but I would still count them as 3.
That's in the family of whatever it is.
That's an event. Yeah. That's that.
Or the bread winners that in the family.
Right. So the death of any family member or the breadwinner's death, that's actually an event, and definitely if the person is not sick, or we cannot really always say that we know when this is going to happen. We may not have any inkling about it. It's an event. It's a really disastrous or sad event for the family. But the 3 criteria kind of that we have set for the events here, it does not meet one of the criteria. So yeah, so we are really choosy. So but okay, I'll count them 4 and say that so I think we have got the idea. So okay, what type of events we have talked about, but all the events that we have heard so far, except for the unforeseen nature, which was more of characteristic, they have kind of some negative connotation attached to it. So all these are all these events bad, or so can there be some good events against which we may need to have some capital? I mean, there are some contentious events. You are not sure whether they are good or bad. You will take some time to realize whether these are good events or bad events, right? And you need capital against such events, right? But there are events where you know whether they are good or bad, for sure. So you know when these events are bad or good. I don't think people will have doubt about it. Okay. Anyway, jokes apart. So I'll just list some of the events. So these are the events, and typically these are the names that would come to our mind when we talk about event risk. So earthquake, landslides, cyclones, cloudbursts, floods, and drought, tsunami. And we don't have any control over these events. They are mostly natural disasters. There are some man-made events. Some of these events are bad, but some of the other events may not be, right? So these events can be disruptive in nature, but they need not always be bad. For example, even labor strikes, it need not be bad. People may be fighting for better wages, better rights, safety, protection. So these need not be bad. Now here, it's a contentious. Okay, now there are some good events, but they are disruptive in nature. For example, the mobile technology and what happened to all those PCOs, ISD, what happened to the business of sending fax, and the way Google and Google emails and Twitter has changed things, the way people do business. All these are constructive, but for them they have been disruptive. So for example, if you have a really good product in market and suddenly the technology, there's a new some discovery, some invention of a new product, and then you may be just out of the market. Okay, so these are all different types of events. The idea.
What is fermentation? I'm just curious.
Oh, so that's the invention of alcohol.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So it's like big setback to dairy business. So we need to focus actually here. So, but why kind of I had all these events here listed, because when we think of a framework, when we think of such a framework, we cannot restrict ourselves, because these events, they are really bad. They are really bad in nature because we don't think about them. We don't expect them. And actually that's a very important characteristic that you mentioned, that they are unforeseen events. So I'm sure that there will be like millions of events outside these. And if we don't consider them, relevant bad events, we don't consider them in our framework, then we may not have a complete framework in place. But we need to focus. We cannot really cover all these events. It will be like too many bad things for a day. So we'll just focus on 4 events: earthquake, flood, cyclones, and drought. And so let me give you a brief kind of background. So we, at IFMR Capital, we tried to build a framework to estimate capital against event risk, and we started with these 4 events. And we did some groundwork. We came up with a very basic framework. And we go to the framework in the end, but before we'll spend some time in actually understanding what's the framework, what do we mean by estimation, what's capital, and events we have covered in detail. But where the risk is coming from. So so I'm sure that we all are kind of familiar with the definition of risk. So this is I just picked it up from my earlier presentation for Amber. So the copyrights belong to Amber. So what is risk? Risk is all these things. It's just a Google search for the word risk. Typically, what we mean here when we say capital for estimation of loss, and what we are talking about here is that loss to whom? So who's keeping this capital? So I'm sorry I didn't kind of give you that background. So it's from the perspective of a firm that is lending. It's a financial firm, right? And we need not really think of that firm as IFMR Capital, but any firm that's in the business of lending to borrowers, as in to retail or consumers, or to other financial institutions. And these borrowers are kind of spread across all over India. So from that perspective, and so the risk that we are mostly talking about here is the possibility of a financial loss here. Okay, so I think that's.
Is this also the big business houses in Mumbai? The risk of a cyclone or a tsunami?
Sure.
Why just small?
Sorry?
Why just small? It could be the big ones as well, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, they can be big ones as well. Right. So we have the events now, but where's the risk coming from? Right. Definitely. Earthquake. Definitely that's risky. It's intuitively risky. Sorry. Yeah. Right. So it's unforeseen in nature. That's right. But there are many things that I'm not able to predict. Whether the butterfly will flap through this room or not, I'm not sure. But that's not risky. Sequences of the events, right? So action. What these events do, so what earthquakes do, they destroy, they damage, they are completely destructive in nature, except for You can make movies on them. So this risk is coming from different characteristics. There's one more. So what they do, so they destroy, but they destroy at a large scale. That's the problem. Lightning usually is not an event. Lightning is very destructive in nature, right? You can do time travel using that thing, but it's not a very large scale. So it's basically the scale at which these events work, they destroy, and the action. So basically they destroy. Ground will shake, buildings will fall, a lot of for floods, a lot of water will come to places where we don't want, and the timing. Yes, so we cannot predict them. So that's a very important feature. So all these things put together make these events risky. So actually the event that death of the breadwinner would kind of qualify on the action and the timing, but it may not qualify on the scale. So we'll focus on. So if you want to build any framework or you want to build any system, any model to kind of deal with these events, you may want to mitigate the risk. You may want to come up with a method to build better societies or plan towns in a way so that you can mitigate or bring the risk down, or you may just want to build a model to say that how much capital I need to have against these risks. We need to deal with these things. We need to understand the scale, action, and timing. Now, how do we do that? So it's basically, okay, so just more explanation. So scale is basically who's going to get affected, right? Lot of people, but who exactly? So a person who is actually camping in a football ground may not get affected in an earthquake unless there is like a crack in the earth and he goes inside that. And action, how? Right? So how actually, so the buildings will fall, but what kind of buildings will fall? If it's floods, then how? So what will be the kind of the path of the flooded river? If it's drought, then how much time drought will take. If it's cyclone, then what's the path of the cyclone? Heavy winds are going to be there, so they will push things and buildings will fall. The big boats will fall on people, and so that's how. And finally, the timing. So when, right?
The intensity will come under action, right?
Yes, intensity will come under action, right? How? So how do we kind of do this? So who? Okay, now think of from our financial firm who's lending actually. So who? So how can they actually tackle this? So they can actually maybe map their borrowers or the geographies in which they work with and say that how many geographies are susceptible to risk. So mapping is useful. So how many of their borrowers or the catchment area is actually near the river banks or on the near some of the most treacherous rivers are. History. We can look at the historical events, right? And we can look at the past reports. So these are very useful. So effectively, actually, this is what we did. So this is not a prescription, actually. Again, so this is what we did, and I'm sure that there will be like far more better way of doing this. Then action. So we didn't exactly do this. So we didn't study geology, but this is how you can do. So you can study the way in which that event affects the local geography, or so you can study the movement of water. So you can actually study that where are the river beds, where are the dry river beds, where actually during the flooding can river go. So for example, I'll give an example here. The 2008 Kosi floods in Bihar, they were particularly destructive in nature. And so I may not be able to use the correct terminology, but typically, if you look at any river, there is a river path, right? And then there is something, I don't know, I forgot what exactly it is called, some alluvial plain or some plain. So what exactly this plain is? It's basically very fertile soil actually. That's what I know. But if the river is flowing this way, then actually river with time can change its course. But typically this is called alluvial sand. and because it looks like a Chinese fan. So it can actually move anywhere. So it can shift its course with time. During Kosi floods, overnight, the river changed its course by some 10 to 15 kilometers. It moved this way overnight. That was like an event. So rivers change course. That's not an event, but they don't change it overnight. So overnight, if you know, oh, there is a river 10 kilometers. Next morning it's here. That's an event. So and that's very destructive. So actually, and all these people who are living in this area, and part of the residential area was actually they're overlapping with that alluvial fan. So you can actually study the local geography and other, maybe the hydrology, to say that what could be the extent of the damage. Then finally the timing. Timing is simple. It's the most easy thing to solve. It's basically you just need to hire rocket scientists or an astrologer, and your problem is solved. Yes. So we couldn't hire rocket scientists or any astrologers. So what we did here was something very, very simple. So the approach we took was that we are not experts in timing. So it's a difficult thing to do. So we concentrated on the how part and the scale part. And the way we concentrated in the how part was slightly different. Because in how we have only covered that the river will change its course. But the damage is not because the river has changed its course. Damage is not because there is an earthquake. Damage is not because there is a flood or drought. Damage is because there are people living there. They have their livelihoods there. And their livelihoods are getting affected. Their houses are getting destroyed. And the financial loss with which we are talking about here. So we are only concentrating on financial loss. And that may sound a bit rude, but that's what we are concentrating on. And the financial loss will happen when there is an impact on the livelihood, when there is an impact on the health of any of the family members, when they are, they're not living in their houses, they are living in camps. There can be diseases after an earthquake. So there is additional burden on the family. So when their cash flows are getting impacted. So if we can link the event to their cash flows, so covering all the geology and the hydrology and the history, and say that what's the linkage of the event to the ultimate impact on the cash flows, then we can arrive at some certain estimations. So that's the approach that we took. Okay. So now we have covered event, we have covered risk. Now.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Did you cover if there's an event that happens? What are the linkages that broke? Infrastructure linkages that broke? Did you cover that if there was an earthquake in Jammu and Kashmir in the month of September and all the homes are broken down and there's winter coming in October, how are they going to cope with that? There's an earthquake, they've lost their land, the land doesn't exist.
Right.
They're shepherds, their livelihood is completely destroyed because winter around as well.
Right.
Have you looked at second level or a secondary level of disaster that happens because a disaster has happened? For example, in the Koshi floods, X number of people died.
Right.
12X died because of dissension. Did you look at that?
And the perfect example of this is also when in Uttarakhand, though the floods which happened last year didn't touch our bed, but where Sarastadhara operates, but there was huge impact with the livelihoods of our customers as well because the tourism community.
Right.
So because of which their livelihoods.
Right. So we in the model that we built, we didn't look at all these linkages. Rather, I should say we couldn't look at all these linkages. But the reason was that we couldn't look at these linkages was because it gets really, really complex. The approach that we took was that if there is going to be an event, we'll break that event into different events. For example, if there is going to be an earthquake, or so let's say there is going to be a cyclone. A cyclone would most probably be followed by a flood in that area, which is affected. So we studied the effect of the cyclone, we studied the effect of the flood, and say that how cyclone would have impacted different people and how flood would have impact. The next level ideally should be that if there is a cyclone, then first thing that will go away is power. There won't be any power cut. So this is the approach that we took. So if there is a cyclone, there is a power cut. So all the industries which are dependent on the power, they will not be able to work. If there is a cyclone, then obviously if it's cyclone, and by definition it would come at a coast, then the fishing business would get affected. So we took a very narrow approach, and the approach was to say that how cash flows are going to get impacted, and we kept the things very very simplistic, saying that if I'm studying cyclone, I would study cyclone, but with cyclones we will study floods, but with earthquakes we will not kind of build in the epidemics, or with the floods we will not build in the epidemics. So we have built in only these 4 risks so far, and the way we are kind of simulating these events, we are agnostic to when these events are happening. So for example, in Jammu and Kashmir, if there is an earthquake or there are floods, and followed by winters very soon, then things will be very difficult. In the current model, we have not really built that. But I think that's a very useful feedback. That we should look into that. But how we are kind of building that in our model is, so that is one part, saying that whether the flood is going to be or not. A very useful way to build that is to study past events. So for example, we studied what happened in Bhuj. We studied 2 recent floods, 1 cyclone. We spoke to some of our partners as well, that how did they handle all these events, and more important, how the borrowers they kind of did cope up with this. So how did they manage their cash flows? How long did they take to kind of recover from this? And there are very useful reports prepared by disaster management, our department, the government department, and various other organizations, NGOs. They come up with these reports, and these reports are very useful because they not only just talk about that they don't just give the facts, but they also give various anecdotes and stories that what exactly happened, how did this happen. So for example, in Mumbai floods, it was not just the rain, it were different things coupled with heavy rains. So for example, heavy tide was high. There was water being, kind of discharged from a dam, and something didn't kind of, there was a lack of coordination between various authorities. So there's a story around it, and then you can actually build various scenarios. So thing is that when you say an earthquake or a risk, and you arrive at different, when you say that risk from the event to the loss, there are different ways in which an event can result in a loss. And then you have to build in all those scenarios. So we'll cover that to some extent, but not in a comprehensive way.
I had one question. So you said you were time agnostic, which means, I would assume that timing would also look at the probability of an event happening in a particular geography. For example, earthquakes in Delhi would have happened much more than earthquake in another place.
Okay. So when I said time agnostic, it was like we didn't kind of care that whether it's happening in January or February. But what I'm saying is that so in Delhi or in Haridwar, the probability of seeing an earthquake would be it is very high than say in some other geography. So not this time, but like when it's happening. So for example, if there is an earthquake in Bombay during June or July, during July or August, then the relief work may get impacted because there will be rains around that time. There could be a risk of epidemics around that time. So those kind of linkages we hadn't built in the system. So as I mentioned that our timing, we kept it very simple. Okay. So now we'll kind of move quickly to the capital part. So when we say that we need to set aside some capital, or we need to have some capital against these event risks, what do we mean by capital? Yeah. So I should ask you, sorry. I forgot. So, what do we mean by capital? When we say that we should have some capital against event risk.
Like a contingency plan.
Sorry?
Contingency reserves.
Yes, contingency reserves. Right. So that's right actually. Contingency reserves. So capital is, I mean, very crudely, something that would help me stay afloat. That would allow me to sustain any risk or weather any risk, or that I may face during my business. So yeah, right. So there is no contingency word here, right? So nobody can do. So that's right. That's the definition of capital. What we are kind of so here's the more accurate one that we used was that amount that a business or company should have to sustain the risk it takes on in the line of business. So that's a very bookish Investopedia type definition. I have juggled the words so you cannot really find from where I have taken this definition. So okay, so here is one example to help us understand better what the definition of capital is. So there is a lending firm. It's called the firm ABC that faces the risk of losing 20% of its portfolio in a year due to credit risk. So it's a lending firm. It lends money to borrowers, different. Let's say they are like retail borrowers, companies, and they face the company faces the risk of losing 20% of its portfolio in a year, and so they should maintain at least the following proportion of its assets as net worth. And you have 4 options: 10%, 15%, 20%, 25%. What do you think is it? I've taken the audience poll. You have to help me. 20%, okay. So for those of you who are kind of undecided, there is a hint. So assume that the bank faces only one type of risk, credit risk. So if the bank is not, the bank may face risks other than credit risk, right? So we have made it simple. If you are still undecided, then there is one more option. There is a problem with the question, right? And there is one more option actually. That's like all of us MBAs would love that option. That depends. Well, so let's see. So the capital alone cannot help us. This section alone. So there is one more section actually, the estimation section, that would kind of help us in understanding the true meaning of capital here. So we need to know with what certainty I'm facing a particular risk. So actually there was indeed a problem with that question, but the answer was, it depends. So all the MBAs can have your laughter. So it depends on the unexpected losses at different levels of certainty. So when you face a risk, if it's sure, for example, in that question, it looks like the lending institution actually faces the risk of losing 20% with 100% surety. Then it wouldn't be called capital. If you know that you're going to lose 20%, you may as well make provisions against it and just set aside that amount. You don't need to have capital against it. You need to have capital only if you're not sure that what the actual amount you would tend to lose and at what confidence level. So we need to know the unexpected losses at different levels of complexity. And second, so it depends on, among other things, the unexpected loss and the confidence level and the credit rating that ABC is aspiring for. Because that credit rating, or how trustworthy or creditworthy ABC would want to be, that would determine what confidence level we need to calculate the unexpected loss rate. So I'll just say that, if you use the same example, then ABC if the ABC is aspiring for a AAA rated, then they would need to have a really large amount of capital with them, so that come what may, they will never ever go bankrupt, whatever the risk is, right? So, for example, if you think of any AAA financial institution, any bank, if it's any public sector bank, why do we trust in public sector banks? So it's like a really, really contentious question. Okay, if there is a planet outside solar system and there is a public sector bank and there is a government, why do we trust that public sector bank? Because the government may give implicit guarantee that the bank will never fail, and if bank is about to fail, then we will kind of pitch in. So there could be regulations in that, and that regulation could be really good at that planet, in that planet system. So we trust bank because we know that bank can pitch in at any point of time. So government can pitch in at any point of time, and there is, so effectively bank has access to the unlimited amount of capital on that planet. So loss distribution may help us here because we are talking about uncertainties at different confidence levels. So there is some probability here. There is some uncertainty here, and when there is uncertainty, so what is the uncertainty? Event can happen, event may not happen. There may be an earthquake, there may not be an earthquake. So if I have given loan to commercial vehicle borrowers, so when there was an earthquake, if there is an earthquake, and if it's at midnight, mostly they will be sleeping in their homes, right? But if it's maybe in the noon, they would be driving, they would be outside their hometowns. So maybe they will be safe. So there are all kind of uncertainties. So you attach probability to them, you come up with various scenarios, and we say that okay, there's a loss distribution, and using that loss distribution, so which would be something like this. Now if we go in loss distribution, we can spend a lot of time here. But I just say that loss distribution is a thing, but a probability distribution with loss here and probability here. Right? So it's more of frequency, and if it's continuous, then this is not exactly the probability. This will just be the probability density. And the area under the curve would give you the probability, right? So if we say that this area under the curve is 1%, then this loss is at 99% confidence level. Okay. So I'm sure that many of us have been through the basic risk management training session that was designed by Dr. Nachiket, and that was like that's like one of the best training modules in risk management. So if you have not, then you can go through the training material, and in the first few pages that module has that material has covered the concept of the probability distributions and what exactly we mean by the distribution of loss. Okay, can we move to framework now? All right. Okay. I heard a yes. So, okay, so now we have moved on to the framework. So what was the framework that we built? So again, this framework is fairly simple in nature, and we have talked about event and then the portfolio loss. So from event to portfolio loss, there are like numerous scenarios. There are various dynamics, interplays, interlinkages, all other words, complicated words that you can throw. All those things are there in between, and then ultimately you get portfolio loss. So ideally, the framework should mimic. So I inserted that should later. So I forgot to remove that. Sorry for that. So it should mimic the relationship between the event and the portfolio loss, right? So your framework should. So in order to build a framework, you should know what's the relation between event and portfolio loss. So yeah. So if there's an event, then there are various relations between them. They can come because of the geographical exposure. So we are talking about portfolio loss here. So we are talking about the context is the lending firm. So if there is an event, what's the loss on the portfolio of the lending firm? So where the portfolio is originated, it's important in what geography it is. So if the event is earthquake, and there's an earthquake in, let's say, in city XYZ, And if the portfolio is 500 kilometers away from XYZ, so unless all the people, all the borrowers are attending a marriage in XYZ, they are mostly safe. So, location vulnerability. So if your portfolio is in a particular location, how vulnerable that location is to different events, right? Underlying industry. So when I say underlying industry, it's basically the livelihoods. So all these borrowers, how are they earning their money? So if the borrowers are all, they are dependent on their farmers, are dependent on agriculture, then a drought would hit them. But if all these borrowers are in service industry, let's say they are cycle mechanics, they have small cycle repair shops, electricians, they repair fence, and they may not be impacted by the earthquake. But if there is an event, there is a cyclone, and there is like power disruption for 1 year, then all the electricians will go out of business, unless people have generators and supply of petrol and diesel. Then underlying asset class. So underlying asset class is, so this was, since we built it for our portfolio, and we have different underlying asset classes like microfinance institutions. So the microfinance loans, one asset class. Then the second, commercial vehicle, housing finance, affordable housing finance, small business loans, and agri loans. So all these are very different asset classes. So for example, if you think about earthquake, earthquake is really devastating. Think of, let's say, drought. So you would think that people or borrowers in certain asset class may be more prone to drought than, say, for example, affordable housing finance, right? So if your affordable housing finance portfolio is mostly urban in nature, then urban portfolio may not be impacted by drought. So it's important to think about the underlying asset class. But ultimately, you may argue that if I ignore underlying asset class and just focus on the borrower, and I just focus on underlying industry where they are, then I need not worry about the underlying asset class, right? But the asset class is important because the asset class may be secured. So if I have, loans may be unsecured, loans may be secured, and from portfolio loss point of view, the security is important, right? So a housing loan is secured by the house. So a flood or a drought may not impact a housing loan, but an earthquake can impact a housing loan because it will have an impact on the security itself. So even if the livelihood of the borrower is intact, even if the borrower's health and everything is intact, but if the house was rented and house is no more there, if the security is no more there, borrower may have little incentive, or at least reasonably less incentive to kind of repay back the loan. And finally, the risk mitigants. Yes, risk mitigants are very important. Risk mitigants here, insurance. One really good example of risk mitigants. So when you build such a framework, you need to kind of understand that what's the penetration of, say, insurance in that particular market, particular area. Do people have insurance against fire, earthquake? Because we got one really useful feedback. So Bama shared with us a story that in the California earthquake, I guess, most of the damage was done it was done by the fire that spread out after the earthquake. So it all becomes complicated actually with insurance. So whether you need to have fire insurance or earthquake insurance, or whether the fire after the earthquake is covered or not. But you may have fire that may not seem like a result of the earthquake. So the risk mitigant actually it becomes important. Okay, so framework very quickly to cover different aspects. So first is we cover the scale question using the mapping module. So mapping module say, okay, you have your portfolio, map it to different geographies, map it to different risk factors. And how do we do that? Well, we map it. So you look at each borrower and say what geography, what branch it is in, what's the latitude, longitude, where exactly is there on that map of India, and whether the geographic location is vulnerable or not, right? Then okay, we go the same kind of cycle. So what information, what are the informations we have about this borrower? So what industry, what's the source of livelihood? Okay, if it's if it's a housing loan, what's the security? Right? If it's residential property, if it's residential property, whether it's a flat, it's a house. If the security is a commercial property, what type of, it's multi-storied building, it's a single-story building, it's whether it's land, then you look at those factors. And similarly other 10, 15 factors, whatever information that you have, and you can say that whether this information is relevant or not, and you map that. And when we say map, that is you standardize that information, and that would help a lot. So for example, we had around some 1700 different types of occupations or livelihoods, ranging from travel agent to poha maker to dog catcher. But thing is that you have to map them. So we mapped them, those 1700, to some 40 or 44 categories, and then we took a call that of these 44 categories, what's the vulnerability of these livelihoods based on vis-a-vis the event. Also, for each category, whether it's a manufacturing, it's a trading, or it's a services. Why? Because if a person is a trader, then supply and demand may not hit that person significantly. Sorry, demand would hit, supply may not hit. So for example, a vegetable vendor may not get hit as severely as a farmer in case of a drought. Because if it's just a vegetable vendor, if he's a trader and his job is to buy from the mandi and sell it in the market at a margin, then the extent to the kind of the severity may not be very high for that person. Now it may depend on business to business. Similarly, manufacturing unit, a person working in the manufacturing unit or a servicing industry. So for example, cycle mechanic versus an auto part manufacturer. So auto part mechanic or auto mechanic may not get impacted in case of labor strikes, as auto part manufacturer would get impacted if there is a strike in Maruti, right? Because vehicles will not disappear overnight unless they are stolen. So that was the mapping module, and what we kind of came up with was, here's one example of what we did, that we came up with a useful function where we can identify the exposure pockets on the map. So if we say that if we give a latitude and longitude and say that there is an event in a particular branch, so there is a branch called Chomu near Jaipur, and there's an event in Chomu, what's my exposure around that area? Around 10 kilometers, around 20 kilometers. So we get that what is my exposure around that area. The red dots are exposures greater than a certain amount, say more than 1 crore, and then the other dots, lighter dots, based on if the exposure is less. It would help us to identify in case there is an event, and not just natural disaster. If it's a social unrest, or it's a community based some violence, then that how much of your portfolio is at risk, whether the areas are well connected or not. So you can actually build that into it as well. And this will also be very useful when you kind of try to estimate the loss or the damage in a situation of earthquake. Because what we found was that, and this is very intuitive actually, this is not rocket science, but we also have the data to support this, that in an earthquake, if you move away from the center, then the damage actually falls non-linearly. It's like an exponential fall in the damage, not just in terms of the damages to the houses, but also in terms of the deaths and other injuries. So you can actually say that if there is an earthquake here at this point, then probably my damage would exponentially fall around that area. So I need to kind of build that into it. You can also in that area find out what are the MSME clusters, right? So if there is a drought, or there is a flood, or there is an earthquake in that particular area, you can see what type of industries are going to get affected, and how many of these MSME clusters are you exposed to through your loans, because those clusters would get hit. And effectively, if there are any linkages in your portfolio, then you may see those defaults. Then comes the impact module. Impact module is the trickiest module. So impact module is where we capture how. So how an earthquake or any event would result into damage, and that's very difficult. And there are firms who are experts in the timing. So there are actually firms who claim they are rocket scientists, and there are models in the market which you can off-the-shelf products you can buy. You can prescribe to different reports. They can give you a sense about the timing, whether earthquake is possible or not. But the how part. So if there is a flood, if there is a cyclone in a particular geography, and if we have our portfolio there, what will be the damage? Or if you ask someone, oh, there is a cyclone, winds are flowing at 150 knots, and I have exposure in that particular geography, the person will say it's 100% wiped out. It will get 100% wiped out. But that need not be the case, and we saw that wouldn't be the case. Why? And there are many reasons to that. So when we spoke to our partners, when we studied the data that we had, the portfolio performance data through the periods when there was any event or cyclones or floods, what we found was that the impact, the loss from such impacts, it's not based on you cannot really estimate it based on some simplistic assumptions. You have to go and talk to the partners, talk to the borrowers, understand that how exactly they manage it. Right? So we spoke to, for example, an NGO that was active during the Bhuj earthquake, and now they're running an NGO MFI, but at that time they didn't have these great operations. But we spoke to them and we got some very useful insights. So, for example, one of the insights was that when there was damage to the market area, what government did was they got those big tankers or those containers, big containers, in which you must have seen that on the train, that freight train, and they put all those containers in a football field, right, tilted, and not like face up but face down, face sideways, and it looks like a room, so that people can operate their shops within those containers. So if you can operate your shop within those containers, that means even if your shop is damaged, you can actually have a running source of income. So you can actually repay the loan. But the first line, the first sentence, the opening sentence that person said was that a typical recovery time for a Bhuj-like earthquake is like 3 to 5 years. But you cannot make an assumption, say that my money will not come back for 3 to 5 years. That's outright wrong. Because there are ways in which people deal with these situations. So lenders work very closely with borrowers during such times. And borrowers understand that. So lenders may not face borrowers to actually pay all the money. They may work with them, they may provide relief to them. They may actually give them loans to rebuild their houses, rebuild their shops. And then, recovery would follow soon. And we saw that in times of such events, the par or the overdues may peak just after the event, but there would be a gradual recovery. And that recovery is not coming from one probability distribution or one distribution. There is not a pattern. We have to understand the dynamics, that why that recovery is coming. What exactly lenders are doing, what exactly borrowers are doing, what exactly the government is doing. And that may differ from geography to geography, lender to lender, borrowers to borrower, industry to industry, event to event. So those linkages, to understand that cycle is very difficult. And what we have here is a very crude example, a very simplistic example of understanding the impact. So here we have taken out the lender, and just we are not concentrating on the recovery, we are concentrating on the damage. So so we actually hired some of the rocket scientists from IIT Madras, and one of the person came up with this very simple graph and said that so how income generation would get impacted in earthquake. So the intern was Divyashree from IIT Madras, and she was, I think, in materials and metallurgy branch. So she came up with this and said, we can do this. We can look at income generation and say whether it's organized sector or unorganized sector. If it's organized sector, we can look at whether it's salaried or it's business. If it's salaried, then maybe the impact would not be very high on the cash flows. So we are not taking into account the impact on the borrower. So there is a separate module which says that impact on the borrower. So borrower may get injured, borrower they may die. If there is injury, then recovery or not. Then permanent disability is there or not. So all that graph is there. It's only income generation. If it is business, then okay, we take another call. If it's unorganized sector, then what is it? Street vendors, self-employed, small retail, salaried. Then take a call for a small employee. Whether the small employed are home-based or not. If the self-employed are home-based, then they are in a big risk. Because it's basically they don't have diversification of house and the business. So they're at more risk. But if the self-employed it's not house-based, then you take a different call. So basically you make these logical deductions and then you kind of branch each of these further. You can, once you have a basic framework, you can make it more complex. So there is no limit to it. Till the time you say that this is reasonable, I can verify this with the data that I have. To the extent you can complex this. But you should be able to verify this using the data that you have. And it's very difficult to get data to verify this. But you may verify this, or not verify rather. You may want to tie this up with some anecdotal evidence that you can get from people who have seen such events. Okay, we are coming to the end now. So simulation module. So simulation module is when you have mapping module, you have what geography is, where my portfolio is. Okay, if there is an event, how my portfolio is going to get impacted. Now it's time to do the cool stuff. You simulate events. Earthquake in Haridwar, earthquake in Delhi, floods in these locations, drought in 3 states. You play God for some time, and but where do you get probabilities actually to do all this? You can play God, but where do you get the idea that how many earthquakes to get? So what we did was we studied the past history, that how many earthquakes India has seen. We arrived at the distributions. We made some very simplistic assumptions that it's going to be a Poisson distribution. We went through some of the research papers and say what exactly they are saying, what kind of parameters they are using. And we realized after some time that actually, one approach at our level, one approach is not better than another approach. So let's stick to a very simplistic approach. And let's, play God. So, but the probabilities and how do you define what areas to actually, to choose, and how do you differentiate between the probabilities and the severities? When I say severity, is basically the differentiation, categorization of districts. So we have different maps for earthquake map, drought map, cyclone map, and flood map, and we have really good data. For example, for drought map, you even get the probability for each district for a severe drought. So the Pune division of IMD actually publishes that data, or at least they published it once in 2013. So there is a disaster atlas as well. Vulnerability atlas, not disaster atlas. So once you have identified categorized districts, you have your models for different events. So why I'm not spending time on the probability and the models, how did we simulate that? Because our method was very simple, and I'm sure that you can come up with another method, and we can argue whole day that which method is better. And where there are people doing PhDs on that, and even their method is not right. So I'm not really concentrating on that part, right? Because I'm not the expert on that. So how do you simulate events? So we simulate events in different geographies, and so I included that graph mostly because it looks good. So, and then you can measure loss. The tiny dots are our exposure already. And then finally the concluding remarks. So concluding remarks are important. It is difficult to estimate the capital requirement against such risks. So to build such a framework, it's a very complex framework. But I think what we realized was that to start with something simple and then add layers on it. Because we did the same actually. So we spent 2 months trying to build the mother of the models that will kind of give all the answers. And we realized that It's just like more of a stepmother of the model. And then finally so in the assumptions for probability of events and severity of loss given defaults. So severity of loss given events, the impact module, it should be refined on a continuous basis as we receive new data, new information, new stories. So stories are very important in this. And finally, no, not finally, sorry, second last. Mitigants like insurance play an important role, and it's important to get data about such mitigants. So not just that whether the person has insurance or not. If the person has life insurance, whether the acts of God are covered or not, I think they are covered now in at least all the documents that we studied. If the commercial vehicle has insurance, then what exactly are the coverages in the commercial vehicle? If the house has insurance, then what are the coverages in those insurance? And if there are insurances like crop insurance or cattle insurance, because we didn't cover one thing here. In all the events that we studied, all the data, events where even if you don't see casualties, like human casualties, livestock was really badly affected. So there it helps that if you know that in what's the underlying livelihood. And actually I forgot to spend some time on one thing, on the timing part, on why the timing was important. So the scale, action, and timing. So you said that it's unforeseen, right? And you also mentioned that when this is going to happen, and what if you don't know about it? So timing makes these things really dangerous. What if there is a cycle attached to these events? Do we call them events then? Do we say it's an event risk? So we spoke to some of our partners, and what they said was, so sir, people are habitual of floods here. So they know that every year the floods will come here. And we are also habitual of floods here. So the really bad floods are near the bank or near the river banks and the remote areas, and we don't go there. So we don't operate there. I mean, it's not that I'm not portraying them as villains. But thing is that people also don't live in those areas where there are floods. And if there are areas where floods are common, usual, people have mitigation measures there. They have alternate sources of income if the area is prone to drought. So people, if they have their small gardens or they have something like a small farm, then they will also have some alternate sources of income. They would also have a sewing machine. They will also have some other skill with which they will be earning money. So what we found was that if some of the geographies are frequently visited by these events, then people actually get accustomed. They put in place mitigation measures. They put in place alternate source of income. Lenders have different strategies to deal with these things. So for example, what we heard from this person was that they said this geography is frequently visited by floods, but there was a drought 4 years back, and that was an event. So for them, drought was an event. Landslide and earthquake would be an event. So even if the geography is visited by these, scale could be such that it would qualify as an event. What happened in the case of Kosi? So Kosi is called the River of Sorrows for a long time, but nobody expected it to kind of change its course overnight so drastically, and so it was an event. Okay. And so anecdotal evidence will provide useful insights. Okay. So, thank you.